Commander Li Gu sat at her monitoring station on the edge of human space, sipping cold coffee and watching the endless void of stars. It was another quiet night shift at Outpost Horizon, the farthest human installation from Earth. Most days, nothing happened here except the occasional asteroid drift or solar flare warning. Then the signal came through at first. Gi Wu thought it was just space static. But as she adjusted the frequency, she heard something that made her blood run cold. Voices. Alien voices. Speaking in a language she had never heard before, but the emotion was unmistakable. Pure terror. "What is that?" asked Technician Chomin Jun. Leaning over her shoulder as the transmission crackled through their speakers, Ji Wu's hands flew across her console, trying to clean up the signal. The words were foreign, but the sounds behind them were universal. Explosions, screaming, the sound of buildings collapsing. And underneath it all, the desperate pleading of people who knew they were about to die. "It's a distress call," Ji Wu whispered. "Someone out there is in serious trouble." The transmission continued for almost 10 minutes. Through the static and alien language, they could hear what sounded like families calling out to each other, children crying, adults shouting warnings. And then, gradually, the voices began to fade. One by one, they went silent. "My God," Cho breathed. What happened to them? Gi Wu was already running the signal through their translation software. The computer struggled with the alien language, but slowly, fragments began to make sense. The speakers called themselves the Valen. They were peaceful farmers and artists, living on a world called Valen Prime, and they were under attack by something called the Asur Empire. The final part of the message was the most chilling. It was a plea for help, broadcast to anyone in the galaxy who might be listening. The Valen knew they were dying. They knew their world was falling. They hoped that somewhere someone would hear their cry and remember that they had existed. Sat back in her chair, her heart pounding. In all her years monitoring deep space, she had never heard anything like this. The raw fear in those voices haunted her. These were real people, real families, being destroyed by something terrible. Commander Cho said quietly, "What do we?" Dugu knew the rules. First contact protocols were clear. Any alien communication had to be reported to the Galactic Council first. Humans were still newcomers to the galactic community, and they were supposed to follow proper channels. But something about those desperate voices made her hesitate. She pulled up her communication array, sent the signal to 2 places at once. The first transmission went to the Galactic Council headquarters as protocol demanded. The second went directly to Earth Command, to Admiral Park Min-ho. She knew she was breaking rules. She knew there would be consequences. But as those alien voices echoed in her mind, Ji Wu realized that some things were more important than following orders. Somewhere out there, people were dying. And maybe, just maybe, humanity could help. Captain Kim Soo-jin gripped the armrest of her command chair as her stealth ship dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Valen system. The bridge crew worked in tense silence, their instruments scanning for any sign of the mysterious Nexer Empire that had attacked these peaceful aliens. "What are we looking at, Lieutenant?" Kim asked her sensor operator. "Captain, you need to see this?" Lieutenant Bay replied, his voice shaking slightly. "I'm putting it on the main screen." The view screen flickered to life, and Kim felt her stomach drop. Valen Prime, once a beautiful blue-green world according to their databases, now glowed with the orange light of countless fires. Even from millions of kilometers away, they could see massive ships in orbit around the planet, easily 10 times larger than anything in the human fleet. "Take us in closer," Kim ordered. "But keep us hidden. I want to know what happened here." Engineer Han Yujin worked frantically at his station, adjusting their stealth systems to avoid detection. "Captain, I'm picking up massive energy signatures from those ships. Whatever they're doing down there, they're using enough power to run a small star system." As they moved closer, the horror became clearer. The Nexer ships weren't just attacking the planet, they were strip mining it. Massive beam weapons carved deep scars into the surface, while giant cargo vessels loaded raw materials into their holds. But that wasn't the worst part. Communications Officer Choi Da-yoon suddenly gasped at her station. "Captain, I'm intercepting." Transmissions from the surface. The translation program is working, and ... double quotes. She paused, her face going pale. They're loading survivors onto ships. Survivors. Kim moved to Choi's station. Show me. The communications array crackled to life with desperate voices. Through the static, they could hear Valen families calling out to each other as they were separated. Parents screaming for their children, children crying for their parents. Universal sounds of families being torn apart. They're not killing them all, Choi whispered. They're taking them as slaves. Han had been recording everything with their long-range cameras. Captain, look at this. His voice was tight with anger as he enhanced the images on his screen. Those aren't military targets they're hitting. Those are schools, hospitals, residential areas. Kim watched in growing horror as the footage showed Nexer soldiers herding groups of Valen, civilians toward massive transport ships. The aliens were tall and thin, with pale blue skin and large eyes that seemed to hold all the sadness in the galaxy. She watched as a young Valen child reached out for its parent, only to be pushed in the opposite direction by a Nexer guard. Many, Kim asked quietly. Based on the ship sizes and what we're seeing, they're taking millions, Han replied. Ain't the ones they don't take, ... double quotes. He didn't finish the sentence. The bridge fell silent except for the continued transmissions. From the dying world below, every member of Kim's crew had families back on Earth. They all knew what it meant to love someone, to want to protect them. And they were watching an entire civilization's families being destroyed. Captain Choi said softly, "What are we going to do?" Kim stared at the screen, watching another group of Valen families being separated forever. Her hands clenched into fists. "We're going to make sure the galaxy knows what's happening here, every second of it." Ambassador Song Hyron walked into the massive chamber of the Galactic Council with a heavy heart and a datapad, full of evidence that would haunt her forever. The council chamber was an impressive sight, with representatives from dozens of alien species seated in a giant circle. Each species had their own unique appearance, from the crystalline Zephyrians to the gas-breathing Methany, but they all shared one thing in common today. They didn't want to hear what she had to say. "Honored council members," Song began, her voice echoing through the vast chamber. "I come before you today with urgent evidence of a crime against an innocent species." Council leader Vorthok, a massive creature that looked like a cross between a tree and an octopus, barely looked up from his reading tablet. "Ambassador Song, humanity has been granted observer status in this council for only 3 years. You should familiarize yourself with proper procedures before making demands." Song felt her jaw clench, but she kept her voice steady. "This isn't about procedures. This is about the Valen homeworld. They sent a distress signal that we all received, and we have proof of what the Nexer Empire is doing to them." She activated her holographic projector, and the chamber filled with the footage Captain Kim's crew had recorded. The images were stark and brutal. Nexer ships strip mining a beautiful world, cities burning, and worst of all, families being torn apart as civilians were loaded onto slave ships. A few council members shifted uncomfortably in their seats, but most barely reacted. Song felt sick as she watched these supposedly civilized beings look at images of genocide with the same interest they might show a weather report. "As you can see," Song continued, her voice growing stronger, "the Nexer Empire is committing systematic atrocities against the Valen people. They're not just conquering their world, they're enslaving entire populations and destroying everything else." The Colony representative Ambassador Thesic made a dismissive clicking sound with his mandibles. "Ambassador Song, with respect, humanity has been part of galactic society for barely a moment. You don't understand the complexities of interstellar politics. What's complex about this?" Song shot back, pointing to the hologram showing a Valen child being separated from its parents. "These are families being destroyed. This is genocide." Council leader Vorthok finally looked up, his multiple eyes focusing on Song with what seemed like mild annoyance. "The Nexer Empire controls 47 star systems and has one of the largest military forces in the galaxy. They have been expanding for centuries. This is simply how galactic politics works. Song stared at him in disbelief. So you're saying we should just let them continue? Let them enslave entire species because they're powerful? Or saying that intervention would be catastrophic, replied Ambassador Yurlix of the Hegemony Union. The Nexer could turn their attention to any of our worlds next. Is humanity prepared to fight a war against an empire that could crush your entire fleet in a single battle? Song looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of dozens of different species. Some looked away in shame. Others stared back with cold indifference. A few actually seemed bored. So that's it? Song asked, her voice barely containing her rage. You're all too scared to help. Borthic's voice boomed through the chamber. The Galactic Council hereby formally forbids any member species from interfering in Nexer territorial expansion.
Oh.
This includes humanity. Any violation of this directive will result in immediate expulsion from the Council and potential military action. Song stood there for a moment, watching as these representatives of supposedly advanced civilizations voted to abandon an entire species to slavery and death. She thought about the voices in that distress signal, the fear and desperation of people who had done nothing wrong except exist in the path of a stronger enemy. I understand your position perfectly, Song said finally, her voice ice cold. You're cowards. President Yang Ji-hoon stood at the podium in the Global Defense Council chamber, looking out at the faces of Earth's military leaders. The room was packed with admirals, generals, and defense officials from every nation on Earth. Behind him, a massive screen showed the horrific footage from Valen Prime that Ambassador Song had brought back from the Galactic Council. Ladies and gentlemen, Yang began, his voice heavy with emotion, 3 days ago. We learned that an entire civilization is being wiped out while we sit here in safety. The Galactic Council has decided to do nothing. They've forbidden us from acting, they say. The Nexer Empire is too powerful, too dangerous to oppose. He paused, letting his words sink in. Several council members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Everyone in the room knew what was coming next. I've spent the last 3 days thinking about what it means to be human, Yang continued. Throughout our history, we've made mistakes. We've fought wars, caused suffering, and done things we regret. But there's one thing that has always defined us at our best. When innocent people cry out for help, we answer. Defense Minister Lim Soo-jin stood up from her seat in the front row. Mr. President, with all due respect, our entire fleet consists of maybe 200 ships. The Nexer Empire has thousands. This would be suicide. Yang nodded slowly. Absolutely right, Minister Lim. The numbers are against us. Our ships are smaller, our weapons less advanced, our technology decades behind theirs. If we do this, many of us won't come home. Yang could see the conflict on every face. These were military leaders who had sworn to protect Earth and humanity. He was asking them to risk everything for aliens they'd never met. But let me ask you something, Yang said, his voice growing stronger. What does it mean to be human if we can listen to children crying for their parents and do nothing? What does it say about us if we have the power to help and choose to stay safe instead? Admiral Park Min-ho, the man who had first received Commander Lee's transmission, stood up. Mr. President, my granddaughter is 7 years old. When she grows up, I want to be able to tell her that when people needed help, humanity stood up, even when it was dangerous. Even when it was impossible. A murmur went through the room. Could see the mood shifting. These weren't just military officers anymore. Were parents, grandparents, brothers and sisters, thinking about what kind of species they wanted humanity to be. The Galactic Council is afraid, Yang said. They've been living with the Nexer Empire's brutality for so long that they've forgotten what it means to fight for what's right. But we haven't forgotten, we can't forget. Minister Lim was already pulling up fleet readiness reports on her tablet. If we're doing this, we'll need every ship we can get. I'm talking about pulling vessels from Mars defense, calling up reserves, from the asteroid mining operations, even converting civilian transports. Do it, Yang said without hesitation. Every ship, every crew member who volunteers. We're not going to let the Valen face this alone. General Kim Dong-soo from the Space Marines stood up. Mr. President, my troops are ready. We've been training for combat operations, and this is exactly why we exist. Yang looked around the room one more time. I won't lie to you. This could be the end of humanity's place in galactic politics. The Council might expel us. Other species might see us as dangerous troublemakers. But I'd rather be dangerous troublemakers than safe cowards. The vote was unanimous. Admiral Kong Duhayan had never seen anything like it in his 30 years of military service. The space around Earth's orbital shipyards buzzed with activity as ships arrived from every corner of human space. Warships, cargo haulers, mining vessels, research ships, and even converted passenger liners streamed in from across the solar system, all answering humanity's call to help the Valen. Admiral, we've got the Mars Defense Fleet coming in on Vector 7, reported his aide Commander Park. Captain Yoon Nari says she's bringing 12 heavy cruisers and 40 escort ships. Kong nodded, watching the sleek Mars ships take their positions in the growing formation. Captain Yoon had been one of the first to volunteer when word went out. She'd left Mars with every ship that could fly, leaving only a skeleton defense force behind. What about the mining operations? Kong asked. Commander Oh Jae-sung is bringing in the asteroid miners now, sir. They're not pretty, but those ships are tough as nails. Oh has been working around the clock with the engineers to mount weapons on them. Through the viewport, Kong could see Oh's makeshift fleet approaching. The mining ships were massive, ugly vessels designed to crack asteroids and haul or art. They looked nothing like proper warships, but Kang knew they'd be perfect for what they had planned. Their reinforced hulls could take punishment, and their industrial equipment could be converted into devastating weapons. Sir, incoming transmission? From Intelligence Officer Bae Soo-bin, the communications officer announced. Bae's image appeared on the main screen. She was aboard a small, fast courier ship somewhere in Nexer space, and she looked exhausted but determined. Admiral, we've managed to set up sabotage teams on 6 different Nexer supply routes, she reported. The beauty of their empire is that it's so big, they can't guard everything. We're hitting their fuel depots, jamming their communications, and making their supply officers very nervous. Kong smiled grimly. What kind of response are you seeing? Confusion, mostly. They're not used to guerrilla tactics. Their whole military doctrine is based on overwhelming force in conventional battles, and their supply convoys start disappearing, and their communication networks go down randomly. They don't know how to respond. This was exactly what Kong had hoped for. Humanity couldn't match the Nexer Empire ship for ship, but they could fight dirty. Every human military officer had studied Earth's history, full of smaller forces defeating larger ones through unconventional tactics. The best part, Bae continued, is that we're not the only ones doing this anymore. Word is spreading through their empire about what happened to the Valen. Other species they've conquered are starting to resist. There are uprisings on 3 worlds that we know of. Kong felt a surge of hope. Maybe humanity's crazy plan had a chance after all. Admiral? Commander Park interrupted. We're getting volunteer ships from the civilian sector too. Cargo haulers, passenger liners, even some rich guy's personal yacht. They all want to help. How many ships total? Kong asked. 237 combat vessels and another 100 support ships. It's the largest human fleet ever. Assembled. Kong looked out at the massive formation of ships stretching out in all directions. Every vessel carried volunteers who knew they might not come home. Yes. These weren't professional soldiers following orders. These were ordinary people who had heard about families being torn apart and decided they couldn't stand by and do nothing. Commander O, how long until your mining ships are ready for combat? Kong asked over the comm. Give me 6 more hours, Admiral. We're mounting plasma cutters as main guns and reinforcing the hulls with extra armor plating. These babies won't win any beauty contests, but they'll punch holes in Nexer ships. Kong smiled. In 6 hours, humanity would either save an alien species or die trying. The moment the human fleet dropped out of hyperspace above Valen Prime, every alarm on every Nexer ship began screaming at once. Admiral Vexfer, commander of the Nexer. Occupation Force stared at his tactical display in complete disbelief. Over 300 human ships had just appeared in his carefully controlled system, and he had no idea how or why. "What are those primitives doing here?" he snarled at his tactical officer. "The Galactic Council forbade intervention." Captain Shin Minei felt her heart pounding as she looked at the massive Nexer fleet spread across Valen Prime's orbit. Its enemy ship was easily 3 times the size of her heavy cruiser, and their weapons could probably vaporize her entire vessel with a single shot. But that didn't matter now. What mattered were the millions of Valen civilians still trapped on the burning planet below. "All ships, this is Captain Shin," she broadcast to the human fleet. "Remember why we're here? Those people down there are counting on us. First wave, follow me in. Second wave, begin evacuation operations immediately." The human ships moved like a swarm of angry bees toward the Nexer fleet. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and completely outclassed by enemy technology. But they had something the Nexer didn't expect: absolute determination to save innocent lives. "Captain, Nexer ships are powering weapons," reported Lieutenant Kim. "At the tactical station, they're targeting our evacuation transports." Shin didn't hesitate. "All combat ships form protective screens around the transports. Put yourselves between the enemy and our rescue ships." What happened next shocked the Nexer to their core. Instead of engaging in normal space combat, the human warships deliberately positioned themselves as shields. When Nexer weapons fired at the helpless evacuation transports, human ships moved into the line of fire and absorbed the hits with their own hulls. The first human ship to be destroyed was the destroyer Sol, commanded by Captain Lee Huyansu. His ship took a direct hit from a Nexer plasma cannon while protecting a transport full of rescued Valen families. As his ship broke apart, Lee's final transmission was heard across the entire fleet: "Evacuation transport clear. Continue the mission." Admiral Vexfer watched in growing confusion as more human ships threw themselves into harm's way. "What are they doing?" he demanded. "This makes no tactical sense. They're sacrificing their warships to save cargo vessels full of aliens they've never met." His tactical officer was equally baffled. "Sir, I've never seen anything like this. They're using their most powerful ships as shields for unarmed transports. It's completely illogical." But to the humans, it made perfect sense. Commander Park Sung-min piloted his damaged frigate directly between a Nexer battleship and a transport carrying Valen children. His ship's shields were failing, his weapons were offline, but he held position until the transport reached safety. When his ship finally exploded, 300 Valen children lived because of his sacrifice. Down on the planet's surface, the remaining Valen watched in amazement as human landing craft descended through the chaos of battle. These strange aliens had crossed the galaxy to save people they'd never met, and they were dying to do it. "Sir," the Nexer tactical officer reported, his voice shaking, "we've destroyed 47 human ships, but their evacuation operations are actually accelerating. Every time we target a transport, more human warships move to protect it." Admiral Dexver had conquered dozens of worlds, but he'd never encountered an enemy like this. An enemy that cared more about saving civilians than winning battles. An enemy that treated the lives of strangers as worth dying for. For the first time in his military career, he began to feel afraid. Admiral Lee Taeho stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the tactical display with grim satisfaction. The human fleet had lost over 60 ships in the first hour of battle, but they had evacuated nearly 500,000 Valen civilians. More importantly, something unexpected was happening to the Nexer forces. "Admiral, we're intercepting Nexer internal communications," reported Communications Officer Jung Min-hee. "Their field commanders are requesting reinforcements. Some are even asking for permission to withdraw." Lee raised an eyebrow. The Nexer Empire was known for its ruthless efficiency and iron discipline. Their soldiers never retreated, never showed mercy, and certainly never asked for help. But as he watched the battle unfold, he could see why they were shaken. The human ships weren't fighting like any enemy the Nexer had ever faced. When the destroyer Inshin's engines were damaged, Captain Nam Ji-woo deliberately rammed his crippled ship into a Nexer cruiser to prevent it from firing on a transport full of Valen families. When the frigate Busan was surrounded by 3 enemy ships, Commander Useo Jin used his ship's self-destruct to take out all 3 attackers. saving a medical evacuation ship in the process. Sir, Nexer Admiral Vexfer is broadcasting demands. For our surrender, Jung reported. Lee smiled coldly. Put me on all frequencies. I want every Nexer ship to hear this. The communication array crackled to life, and Lee's voice echoed across the entire battle zone. This is Admiral Lee Tejo of the Human Defense Fleet. To all Nexer forces, hear this clearly. We came here for one reason: to protect innocent people from those who would harm them. Every civilian you kill, every family you separate, every child you make cry will bring humanity's full wrath down upon you. On the Nexer flagship, Admiral Vexfer listened to the human transmission with growing unease. Wrath. What does he mean by wrath? His question was answered moments later when 3 human ships, all badly damaged, coordinated a suicide attack on the Nexer ship that had been targeting civilian evacuation sites. The explosion was visible from orbit, and the message was clear. Hurt innocents, and humans will make you pay with their lives. But the real shock came from within the Nexer ranks themselves. Soldier Krekstar, a veteran of dozens of conquests, put down his weapon and walked away from his post. 20 years destroying worlds for the Empire, but watching humans die to protect strangers had broken something in him. Where are you going? Demanded his squad leader. I'm done, Krekstar said simply. I've killed enough families. I won't kill any more. The same scene was playing out across the Nexer fleet. These soldiers had been trained to see conquest as natural slavery, as efficient, and mercy as weakness. But they were watching an entire species risk extinction to save people they'd never met. It didn't make sense to them, and it was terrifying. Lieutenant Commander Park Thajin, piloting a damaged fighter, made one final run at a Nexer troop transport. Her ship was falling apart. Her life support was failing. But she managed to disable the ship's weapons before her fighter exploded. Inside that transport, 800 captured Valen civilians were saved from slavery. Sir, the Nexer tactical officer reported, his voice barely steady. We're getting desertion reports from 17 ships. Some crews are refusing combat orders. Others are requesting immediate withdrawal to home territory. Admiral Vexfer stared at the tactical display in disbelief. His mighty fleet, which had conquered star systems without breaking a sweat, was falling apart against a smaller human force. Not because they were losing the battle, but because his soldiers couldn't understand why humans kept dying for aliens. What kind of species does this? He whispered to himself. What kind of people throw away their lives for strangers? Captain Park Yoonji was exhausted, but she couldn't stop smiling as she read the incoming reports on her command screen. What had started as humanity's desperate mission to save the Valen had become something much bigger. Across the galaxy, species that had been crushed under Nexer rule for decades were suddenly finding their courage again. Captain, we're getting another distress signal, reported her communications officer. This time, it's from the Thymal system. The locals have started an uprising against their Nexer garrison, but they need help. Park looked at her small fleet of 20 human ships. They had just finished helping liberate the Corvin homeworld, where the bird-like aliens had overthrown there. Nexer occupiers, after seeing footage of humans dying to protect Valen civilians. Her ships were battered, her crews were running on coffee and determination, but she couldn't ignore another cry. For help. Set course for Thymal, she ordered. And send a message to Admiral Lee. Tell him we're going to need more ships. 3 star systems away, Commander Jung Woo-sung was having the same problem. His intelligence network had grown from a small human operation into a galaxy-wide resistance movement. Alien species that hadn't spoken to each other in centuries were now sharing information and coordinating attacks against Nexer installations. Commander, the Zelkan resistance on Nexer Prime wants to know if we can provide them with weapons, reported Intelligence Officer Moon So-young. They say they're ready to hit the main slave processing center, but they need better equipment. Jung studied the tactical map floating above his desk. Red dots marked Nexer-controlled systems, but more and more of them were flickering to yellow. As uprisings began, the problem was that humanity's small fleet was spread thin across dozens of worlds. Tell the Zelkins we'll get them what they need, Jung decided. And contact Captain Choi's team on the Helix station. If they can sabotage the Nexer communication network in that sector, it'll buy the resistance movements more time. The beauty of what was happening amazed Jung every day. For centuries, the Nexer Empire had controlled conquered species through fear and isolation. It kept different alien races separated, prevented communication between worlds, and crushed any sign of resistance with overwhelming force. But humanity's example at Valen Prime had changed everything. When word spread that a young species had crossed the galaxy to save strangers, something awakened in the hearts of slaves across the Empire. The Thymals, who had been forced to mine rare crystals for 50 years, suddenly remembered what freedom felt like. The Corvin, whose beautiful songs had been silenced by Nexer occupation, began singing again as they fought their oppressors. "Sir, urgent message from Captain Park," Moon announced. She says the Thymal uprising succeeded, but now the Grexian system is requesting help. Their revolution just started, and the Nexer are sending a battle fleet to crush them. Jung rubbed his tired eyes. How many human ships can we spare? Maybe 15, if we pulled them from the other operations. It wasn't enough, and Jung knew it. But he also knew they had to try. Send what we can. Tell Captain Cho to take his mining ships to support them. Those converted or haulers might not look like much, but they can take a beating. Meanwhile, in the highest levels of the Nexer government, panic was setting in. Emperor Vexenar stared at the strategic display showing his empire's borders. In just 2 weeks, they had lost control of 8 star systems. Not to superior military force, but to uprisings inspired by humanity's actions. How did this happen? He demanded of his military advisors. How did one small human fleet cause this much damage? General Thakfur, veteran of 100 conquests, looked uncomfortable. Sire, it's not about military strategy. The humans have given our subjects something we thought we had taken away forever. Hope. The Emperor's multiple eyes narrowed dangerously. Hope? Yes, sire. When they see humans dying to protect aliens they've never met, our slaves remember what it means to fight for something bigger than themselves. And not just rebelling against us anymore. They're fighting for each other. Emperor Vexenar, of the Nexer Empire, stood in his throne room, staring at the holographic map that had once shown his vast domain stretching across 47 star systems. Now, more than half of those systems glowed red, indicating worlds in open rebellion. His military advisors shuffled nervously around him, none wanting to deliver the final piece of bad news. Sire, General Thakfur said quietly, our forces on Nexer Prime are reporting civil unrest in the capital city. The Zelkin. Slaves have broken out of the processing centers, and they're being joined by workers from a dozen other species. The Emperor's claws scraped against his throne. In just 3 months, everything had fallen apart. It had started with one human fleet saving the Valen, but it had spread like wildfire across his empire. Species that had been enslaved for generations suddenly remembered what freedom meant. Worlds that had been strip-mined for decades found the courage to fight back. How many ships do we have left? Vexenar asked. Maybe 200, sire? But half of those have crews of questionable loyalty. The humans have been broadcasting their message on all frequencies, and our soldiers are starting to believe it. The human message was simple, but it had shaken the foundation of Nexer society. Admiral Li Teho's words echoed across the galaxy. Every person deserves to be free. Every child deserves to grow up with their family. Every species deserves to live in peace, sire. Another advisor spoke up. Ambassador Coulter is requesting permission to begin surrender negotiations with the human fleet. The word surrender hung in the air like poison. The Nexer Empire had never surrendered to anyone. It had conquered, enslaved, and destroyed for over 3 centuries. But now they were being beaten by a species that cared more about protecting strangers than winning battles. Meanwhile, in the rebuilt capital city of Valen Prime, President Young Ji-hoon stood with Valen Elder Mordine, watching human and Valen children playing together in the gardens. The friendship between their species had grown stronger with each passing day. Your people gave us more than our freedom, Mordine said, his translator converting his musical language into human speech. You gave us back our hope, Yang smiled. but his expression was serious. We did what anyone should do when innocent people call for help. The real question is what happens next. The what happens next was already being decided in the Galactic Council chambers. Council leader Vorthok, the same leader who had forbidden human intervention, now sat across from Ambassador Song Hyrin with a very different attitude. Ambassador, Song Vorthok said carefully, the Council would like to formally apologize for our previous stance. Perhaps humanity could consider taking a more active role in galactic peacekeeping. Song kept her expression neutral, but inside she felt satisfaction. The Council had its chance to help the Valen. You chose to look the other way. We were wrong, Vorthok admitted, something that had never happened in Council history. Your species has shown us what real leadership looks like. We would like to offer humanity a permanent seat on the Council and authority to intervene in humanitarian crises. Across the galaxy, the news spread quickly. Humanity, the young species that everyone had dismissed as too primitive to understand galactic politics, was now being asked to become the galaxy's protector of the innocent. On Earth, Admiral Kong Du-Hien read the reports from the Liberation fleets with pride. Captain Park Yoonji had helped free 6 more worlds. Commander Zhang Wusung's resistance networks had grown to include dozens of species. The human fleet that had started with just over 300 ships now included thousands of vessels from dozens of grateful species. But the real change wasn't in the numbers or the politics. It was in the message that humanity had sent across the stars. When innocent people cry for help, someone will answer. When families are torn apart, someone will fight to bring them back together. When the powerful prey on the weak, someone will stand up and say no more. The galaxy would never be the same.